And then I'm going to introduce Ben Granholm from Swing Strategies, who's our presenter. I'll just spotlight him really quick. And then this is Ben. And then I'm gonna let him introduce himself, and then he'll share his screen and we'll get started.
Yeah, good morning. Well, thank you, Nancy, and thanks for having me. Really excited to be here with the team today. Again, I'm from Ben Granholm from Swing Strategies. We are a political consulting and public affairs firm in Sacramento. Much of what we do is focused on statewide and local ballot measures. So this was the perfect opportunity to kind of connect with Nancy and the chamber again, really on a subject that we consider to be our jam. We love doing this. We really enjoy doing this presentation specifically. Going out to local chambers or other organizations throughout the state and getting to kind of geek out with a group of folks on ballot measures, particularly as it comes to the statewide level. But at Nancy's request, we're also going to discuss a couple of the local measures that are particular to your chamber as well.
And then Ben,
Today.
before you go on, I just want to say for those we have a lot of new people, we've been having Swing Strategies do this presentation for us since 2020. So you just see a different person every time.
Yeah, yeah, it's typically either me or my colleague Tino or Tom. We also do these presentations virtually from time to time. We'll do webinars. I actually think we have one coming up in October that we'll be sending out information on for all of you, that you'll all be welcome to attend. Nancy will get that information and can pass it along. But if you are also interested, we also provide some other resources as well. You're welcome to join California Ballot Initiative Update.com. We send up, essentially a brief update. We do not spam you. We only send it out when there's pertinent updates, maybe once every 2 weeks. And I think the last one, because, there really hasn't been any major updates since the ballot was set back in July, was probably the last time we sent one out. But you are welcome to sign up. We track all of the movement of all the statewide ballot measures. There's already some in the process for 2026 that we are tracking. So it'll always, it's always fun to kind of see how that process is moving. So you're welcome to join there and receive regular updates moving forward if you'd like. A little bit more about Swing Strategies. Our president and CEO, Tom Ross, ran his first ballot measure campaign. It was Proposition 218 back in 1996, alongside Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. Amongst our kind of success rate, we roughly 91%. So again, we kind of figure this is an area that we've got pretty well dialed in, that we've found great success in and just really love and enjoy doing here within California. So let's dive in a little bit, as we look at turnout, and obviously we had the March primary that historically was pretty low in terms of turnout. It was a lot of the same, that was a lot of the narrative that came out of March. And because of that low turnout, how is that going to impact November? Obviously, we had Proposition 1, which was a $6.4 billion general obligation bond. It was the only statewide ballot measure on the ballot in November. Governor Newsom made sure of that by actually pushing other measures that we're actually going to talk about this morning off of the March ballot to November, so that it cleared the way for Prop 1, and it still passed by a very, very narrow margin. So I think as we continue to see, through multiple surveys across the state, is the #1 issue for voters and residents in California is the cost of living. So we're going to see a lot of tax measures on the ballot here in November, and I think it's similar to what we saw in the March primary, where many of them will struggle because of the cost of living struggles and the affordability struggles that many are facing in California. But when we specifically think about turnout, and turnout plays a specific role in the ballot measure process as well. And before we dive into a bunch of the measures, I'm going to give a little bit of a breakdown of what that process looks like at the statewide level, just to kind of set the stage on how difficult it is at both the local and statewide level to run a ballot measure. And turnout plays a specific role in that. So let's look at turnout really quick in the primary. We saw roughly 35% turnout. And so, maybe you think, okay, well, we had a really low turnout in the primary. That's probably going to lead to low turnout in the presidential. Well, that's not always necessarily the case, even though most of your top of ticket races, which tend to drive turnout, were still the same. You still had Trump and Biden and what will now be Harris. You still had these larger congressional candidates that were facing off in the Senate race. All of those are still the same. But what we've seen historically is that low turnout in the primary doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have low turnout in the presidential. As you can see in 2012, in the primary, there's 31% turnout, turned into 72% turnout in the general. In the 2020 primary, we saw 48% turnout, which turned into 80% turnout in the general. So there's really no good way to tell what turnout is going to be based off of the primary numbers. But as we get closer to the election, obviously ballots are going to drop here in under a month now, where it's really like 2.5, 3 weeks away from ballots dropping. We're starting to get a better idea of what turnout's going to be, and it does look like it's probably going to be in those mid-70s. And so then when we look at turnouts, this specifically relates to ballot measures. The gubernatorial turnout dictates the amount of signatures that you need in order to qualify an initiative for the ballot. Now, you have 3 different types. And again, this is both at the statewide and local level, but these are specific numbers to the statewide. Is for a referendum, you need 623,000, and 22, excuse me, you needed 623,000. That's the same for an initiative statute. And then for a constitutional amendment, you needed 997,000 signatures. These are verified, valid signatures, verified by the Secretary of State, official signatures by voters in the state of California to place that measure on the ballot. Now, that was based off 64% turnout. In 2022, we had 50% turnout. This is with populations going up, the motor voter, and then so we've had increased voters in the state of California, but we had a reduced turnout in 2022 gubernatorial. We had a historically low turnout in that general election, as you may recall, which actually reduced the number of signatures required amongst all of the initiatives for a referendum and initiative statute. So those measures that are on the ballot here in 2024 only required 546, down about 75,000 signatures from 2022, and then a constitutional amendment, down just under 125,000 from 2022. And so when we're thinking about those numbers, the reduced amount of signatures needed to place a measure on the ballot, it becomes very, very critical. Because when we look at the process and the timeline of a ballot measure, not only is it difficult, but it can be very, very expensive. And so this is just a general timeline and kind of, budget. We're actually seeing, the drafting and research taking place right now for 2026. There are already groups and organizations preparing for 2026 and that first step. Once you place or submit your initiative to the ballot, and honestly, if you aren't really trying to pass a ballot measure, it can be pretty simple. It really only takes $2,000 and an idea. You can submit it to the Attorney General and it'll be placed on the ballot and cleared for circulation. But that doesn't mean you're actually going to make it to the ballot in November. But once you submit your idea, you pay your $2,000, you give it to the Attorney General, they prepare your title and summary. The LAO does an independent fiscal analysis. Then you're cleared for circulation. And at that point in time, you cannot amend it anymore. So once you're cleared for circulation, that is what will be going to the ballot. And then the next step is collecting those signatures. So when we're seeing 75,000 less signatures required, 125,000 less signatures required, that can be a lot of saved money on this next step, because in order to pay signature gatherers to collect those signatures, they're the people that are standing outside Walmart or the grocery store or whatever it may be. They have their clipboard and they're trying to get you to sign. They can be anywhere from $7. In this last cycle, we actually saw getting paid up to $15 per signature So when we're talking about 125,000 less signatures for a constitutional amendment at 15 apiece, or even at $7, $8 a piece, it can be significant cost savings throughout that third kind of section of the process. And then finally, if you are able to collect your signatures, you're placed on the ballot, you have to now run a campaign. And as we've seen in recent years, the cost to do so has gone up. Just in 2022, we saw record-breaking spend with the two sports gambling measures, Prop 26 and Prop 27, spent over $400 million between the two of them for both of them to fail and nothing to change. And that was both in support and opposition of those two measures, but significant amount of money going into really have no changes. And we're going to see that again this year, where really, if you want to win, if you want to run a successful campaign at the statewide level, you're going to have to do TV, you're going to have to do mail, you're going to have to do digital and texts and collateral. You're really looking at anywhere from $15 to $100 million or more, depending on the measure, to make it pass. And all of that to say that this process is very difficult. Only 7% of the initiatives since the initiative process was first established in 1911. So, over 110 years ago have passed, only 7%. So a very minuscule margin. These are just a few of the key dates as we kind of looked at that process. As I mentioned, right now we're in this, August to November. Typically, you're kind of what we consider voter contact starts after Labor Day. So starting September 1st, you get into this section of where, okay, it's go time, where we've got mail schedules to, we're developing ads, we're doing TV shoots, we're placing digital, we're doing text, where the campaigns that have the resources are now moving into full voter contact mode. And so that's where we are now. Obviously, with 3 weeks or so until ballots drop, you've likely already started to see ads on TV. I think, I've seen stuff for Prop 33 and 34 all the time on TV already. And so there's going to be an uptick of that here as we, get closer to the election. But as we take a couple steps back, or as we can look ahead at 2026, as I mentioned, there's already groups doing research and drafting for 2026. Then they'll go into the signature gathering process. And it's really about a year-long, maybe 10-month process to move through the entire process and hopefully become qualified for the ballot. Which brings us to the 10 that we have left on the statewide ballot this year. We're only going to talk about 5 of them today. We narrowed it down just for time constraints a little bit to the ones that are a little bit more particular to the chamber members. But there were initially more than 40 statewide initiatives that were vying to be on the 2024 ballot. More than 40, and we are at 10 standing here now. And part of that is because we saw one of the most active ballot initiative negotiation sessions in history at the end, prior to the summer recess, back at the end of June and in early July, around a number of these measures. The most hotly talked about one of which was the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act. This would have strengthened provisions of Prop 13, in which it was removed by the California Supreme Court. They claim it was a revision to the Constitution as opposed to a constitutional amendment. That was a measure that was originally hoping to be on the 2022 ballot, did have to collect just under that 1 million signatures, verified signatures, to be placed on the ballot, and then was removed by the California Supreme Court back in the end of June. A number of all these other measures, which we're not going to talk about all of them. One other one I will specifically call out is the PAGA reform measure. This was also intended to be on the 2022 ballot. It didn't quite make the 2022 ballot, but that was good because it gave Cal Chamber, the grocers, the restaurants, and other business organizations throughout the state an opportunity to discuss a deal with the governor and the legislature to remove that from the ballot and provide some reform to PAGA, the Private Attorneys General's Act, without having to go to the ballot and without having to spend, that 15 $30–50 million to run a campaign. So that's one that I will specifically call out for this crew. It was a good win here back in the end of June and early July for the business community. And these are your 10. As you'll notice, you have 5 legislative measures that were placed on the ballot by the legislature, and then you've got 5 citizen-led measures. And you can see that they also differ in number, and the legislature did that purposefully. As you remember, we have actually in the last 2 elections, both in the primary in the primary 2024 primary, as well as the 2022 general, we've had Proposition 1. Proposition 1 in 2022 was the abortion measure. Obviously, Proposition 1 in 2024's primary was the mental health bond. So now the legislative measures are picking up with Proposition 2. It's a school bond. $10 billion school bond, which will be on the ballot in November. Proposition 3 relates to marriage equality and solidifying the right to marry within the California Constitution. Proposition 4 is another $10 billion bond. Proposition 5, we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth, but it relates to voter thresholds. Proposition 6 deals with prison labor and an inmate's ability to refuse their work assignments. Proposition 32 is also one that we're going to speak in a little bit more depth about, but it relates to statewide minimum wage. Proposition 33 is statewide rent control, where again, we're going to talk about that one in a little bit more depth as well. Proposition 34 is actually related to Prop 33 in that it requires the healthcare providers, such as AIDS Healthcare Foundation, who is the proponent of Proposition 33, restricts how they can utilize their funds to try and curtail future statewide rent control expansions. And again, we're not going to talk about that one in particular today, but it is connected to Prop 33, and so you've got these opposite sides here. Proposition 35 and 36, again, we're going to talk about both of these in a little bit more depth here, but one is related to Medi-Cal funding and one criminal justice reform. Before we kind of dive right in, I do want to open it up. Are there any questions? I know we've covered a lot here in 15 minutes or so. So just open up real quick if there's any questions on kind of the process before we dive into some of the specific measures. Wonderful. All right, the first one, Proposition 5. Some may remember this as it moved through the legislative session back in 2023. It was kind of a last-minute measure back at the end of the session. It was originally ACA 1, which when passed caused a lot of consternation. There was a split vote even amongst Democrats on this bill because of its potential impact to Proposition 13. ACA 1 originally said it reduced the voter thresholds, what is now requires a 2/3 vote to pass. It reduced that 2/3 to 55% for special taxes or bonds related to affordable housing or public infrastructure. Now, I think the proponents, the legislative author, Cecilia Aguirre, probably did some polling throughout the off season, throughout the holiday season, and coming into 2024, and received quite a bit of feedback from a number of folks, and realized, this is pretty contentious. Maybe we don't have a good shot at passing at the ballot box if we keep it as is. So they actually amended it here again in late 2024, or excuse me, back in June of 2024, to remove the special taxes piece. So it is just—
I'm good. How you doing?
So it is just now only relates to bonds. So ACA 10 amended ACA 1 to only apply that voter reduction threshold to bonds for affordable housing or public infrastructure. It was still roughly a party line vote with a few Democrats opposing it. Does have opposition from the business community, taxpayer community, and veterans community, whereas you see a lot of your professional firefighters, your Habitat for Humanity, and League of Women Voters of California in support. And there's obviously a number of others on each side, but these are the official listed on the ballot arguments as posted by the Secretary of State, which will be included in the voter information guide, which everybody will be receiving here shortly as ballots begin to drop. Proposition 32, again, this is the rest of the ones that we're going to talk about now are measures that were placed on the ballot by citizen initiative. This is one that was actually intended to be on the 2022 ballot. It missed it by one singular day. There are a couple deadlines within this process that are very rigid, and one of those is what took place at the end of June, this time back in 2022, where they missed the ballot by one day. Joe Sandberg, the proponent of this measure, actually sued the Secretary of State trying to get it placed on the 2022 ballot, was unsuccessful and was pushed to 2024. This increases the state's minimum wage to $18 per hour starting what would have been January 2023, but because of the delayed date will be 2025, and then increases for inflation. Obviously, we're seeing in specific sectors the minimum wage increase. We saw the Fast Food Act, which increased it to $20. We saw the hospitals and healthcare workers, even though it's been delayed, pushed up to 2025 or $25 an hour. So Joe Sandberg actually came out and stated, I'm not going to run a campaign to support this. So he has closed his committee to support the measure, but also stated, but I'm not taking it off the ballot. So we are seeing some opposition come out of the California Chamber of Commerce, the Grocers Association, the Restaurant Association, and others within the business community. But from our polling, and as you can see, the polling that's indicated on the screen is actually out of a Berkeley IGS poll, roughly 52% support from voters, 34% opposed, and 14 undecided. From the work that we've done down in Southern California and around the rest of the state, we're hearing $18 an hour is actually probably okay for some folks. It kind of seems to be what individuals at least feel is relatively fair. So this will be one definitely to watch. I don't know that the opposition campaign is really going to put any significant funding into running the campaign, but we just want to more than anything make sure there's a goalie in the net on that front, because it is one that will increase costs to employers. Proposition 33. Now, as I start to talk about this one, you may think, that one sounds familiar. And that's because this is actually the third time in the past 4 cycles that Michael Weinstein and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation have ran an almost identical measure as Prop 33 to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which limited rent control at the local level back in 1995. In 2018, measure Proposition 10, which again was nearly identical to this, was rejected by 59% of voters. In 2020, it was Proposition 21, which was rejected by nearly 60% of voters. And now we're back for a third time with Proposition 33. Again, the business community finds this measure particularly troubling due to the fact that, I don't think any of us can deny California's housing crisis, our affordability crisis. As a renter myself, I would love to buy a house one day, and rents are high. But unfortunately, the opposition campaign, as well as the majority of the business community, wholeheartedly disagree with the proponents in how we can actually make our housing crisis or lessen our housing crisis. The proponents believe that by capping rents and enacting rent control, obviously reduce that kind of near-term costs, whereas the opponents believe that in order to fix our housing crisis, we need more construction. We need to further incentivize construction and new buildings and new housing within the state. So really just two opposite sides of how to fix the same problem in front of this one here. Obviously, you have support from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, ACCE, and Housing is a Human Right. And then, we see opposition from the California Senior Alliance, the California Small Business Association, Cal Chamber, California Council for Affordable Housing, and numerous others. Proposition 35 is an interesting one on the ballot this year. We're actually just kind of now seeing, and for full disclosure, Swing Strategies was brought on to do some outreach on this one. We're just kind of seeing that outreach to the business community start, but we're starting to see it come around. But in a nutshell, Proposition 35 extends California's participation in the Medi-Cal program. So it levies a assessment on healthcare providers and hospitals. And I believe that assessment's only about $30, so it's pretty minimal. But it's set to expire in 2026, so it extends permanently the participation in that program through that assessment, which then generates millions of dollars within the state of California to participate in the Medi-Cal program. By levying that assessment, we can take that millions of dollars that we generated in California and turn it into billions of dollars, roughly $5 billion at the federal level, to come back into California. So instead of having that entire $5 billion kind of resting on the shoulders of California taxpayers, we're able to take the millions of dollars generated through that assessment that was levied on the healthcare providers and the hospitals to come back into California. Really provides critical funding for a number of our disadvantaged communities. I believe 15 million people in the state of California utilize Medi-Cal program, about 50% of which are children. Really goes to fund healthcare for our seniors, our low-income communities, our veterans. And so it really ensures that this critical program can continue to move forward and continue to be funded within the state of California. It also does a few other things which the program has struggled with in recent years. Just this year, actually, we saw Governor Newsom raid these funds to try and divert the funds elsewhere to try and help with the deficit. So Proposition 35 says you cannot touch these funds. They are for Medi-Cal funding and Medi-Cal funding only, really ensuring that these funds stay where they are intended and cannot be diverted elsewhere, providing strict accountability for these measures in these funds. So a really critical one, seeing good activation. I think over 200 hospitals, healthcare organizations, and business organizations now are in support of Proposition 35, and there is no official opposition on file. The last statewide measure we're going to talk about is Proposition 36. This is one you've likely heard quite a bit about. Proposition 36 is really intended to provide targeted reforms to Proposition 47, which was passed back in 2014, and really is intended to provide strict penalties to curb the smash and grab, the retail smash and grabs that we've seen just hammer California small businesses in the past few years. And so on top of, kind of curbing the retail theft, it also includes some increased penalties for fentanyl and drug possession, and as well as some mental health treatment to incentivize mental health treatment. So a very critical measure. There is, a large coalition opposing this measure. Obviously ACLU and a number of others on that side. But you also have the District Attorneys Association, public safety, small business, and crime victims that are all in support of the measure. The initial polling, again, from the Berkeley IGS poll back in August, indicates, an early support of roughly 56% of voters on this measure. And one that's heavily supported by the business community. I think they actually have over 2,000 small businesses within the coalition at this point. And so that covers the statewide measures. Again, that's 5 of the 10 statewide measures that we're going to talk about this morning. We still have a couple others at the local level. And so just a quick snapshot of what we've seen in the previous couple of years regarding local level measures. In 2022 general election, we saw, roughly, I think there was over 470 total measures, but there were 302 local tax or bond measures, and they passed with a 69% rate. In the 2024 primary, we saw 86 that passed with a 71% passage rate. In 2024's general election, the just tax and bond measures, there are more than 470 tax and bond measures on your local ballots this year. So a significant amount of tax and bond measures coming your way this fall. As you can see, there are 203 taxes totaling $3.1 billion and 262 bonds authorizing $49.1 billion. Now, this is excluding the $20 billion Bay Area housing affordability bond that was taken off the ballot just before ballots were certified. So that, one bond in the Bay Area which would have covered 9 counties was $20 billion. They saw the writing on the wall that it did not look like it was going to pass, and so they decided to pull it from the ballot. But we still see nearly over $50 billion in taxes and bonds on your local ballots here in 2024. The first one that we're going to talk about very briefly, because I'm sure there's a number of folks on the call here that are more familiar with these local measures than I do. You guys live, breathe, and work these every day. But I'll just give a real quick breakdown of them. The first one is Measure A, which is a homelessness services and affordable housing ordinance to replace Los Angeles County's 2017 Measure H, which placed a 1/4-cent sales tax to fund homeless prevention and housing efforts within the county. That Measure H is currently set to sunset in 2027. So they're looking at Measure A as a way to extend that funding. Measure A is a permanent extension, with the sunset being until ended by voters. It's estimated to generate roughly $1.076 billion annually, again, until ended by voters. So there is no end date currently set for Measure A. And then you can see, the various kind of allocations of, over 60% for homelessness prevention, 36% for affordable housing, and 3% for housing production. It does require a majority vote. And you can see support from the Women and Children's Crisis Shelter, Habitat for Humanity for Greater Los Angeles, LA Family Housing, and then opposition from Howard Jarvis taxpayers, Mike Antonovich, and Jack Humphreyville. Now, these are the support and opposition that are dictated in the county's release for Measure A. So I anticipate there are others, both in support and opposition, but these are as indicated in the county's ballot voter information guide. The next one is Measure E, which is a fire protection and emergency response and infrastructure ordinance, which levies a 6 cents per square foot tax on certain parcel improvements intended to go for firefighter and emergency response, to hire and train firefighters and paramedics, to upgrade, replace aging infrastructure and equipment, and communications technology. So again, 6 cents per square foot on parcel improvements. It does have some exemptions for seniors and others. It's estimated to generate roughly $152 million annually. Again, we see that language until ended by voters, so no strict sunset included outside of, until voters decide to end it. And it does have a limitation of 2% annual adjustment. Again, this requires a majority vote. You're obviously going to see support from the firefighters, paramedics, and then Assemblymember Freddie Rodriguez, while again, you see the same list of opposition as Measure A with Howard Jarvis, Mike Antonovich, and Jack Humphreyville. And then the last county measure is Measure G, which really deals with the government structure in the county charter to create a number of different positions, one of which is a county CEO, essentially. It also creates an ethics commission to increase restrictions on lobbying and investigate misconduct. They establish a nonpartisan legislative analyst to review county policies. It will increase the Board of Supervisors. Obviously, I think this is one that a number of people could probably get behind. At least this specific section here is increasing the Board of Supervisors from 5 to 9, given the size of LA County. And then it does a number of other things and to try and increase accountability and transparency. It does have estimated implementation costs of roughly $8 million and requires a majority vote to pass. Again, this is one that there was no official support submitted to the county to be included within the voter information guide, but does have opposition from the Los Angeles County firefighters and sheriffs, the Community Coalition, and actually both Republican and Democrat Los Angeles County Supervisors, Catherine Barger and Holly Mitchell. So we got two more here, both at the city level, that we're going to talk about, again, relatively briefly. The first one has to deal with an independent redistricting commission for city council districts. Now, there's actually two redistricting measures, Measure DD and then Measure LL. Measure DD pertains to city council, while Measure LL pertains to the Board of Education. So we're only going to be talking about DD, which is the city council measure. And it amends the charter to establish an independent redistricting committee, which would consist of 16 total measures and 4 alternates. And they would make the final decision on how your city council districts are drawn and redistricted every 10 years, following the federal census as is current law, without the involvement of the council or the mayor. There's been and this is at the statewide and even national level at times when we talk about redistricting, is gerrymandering and our districts being drawn fairly or drawn politically, and so members of special interests down in LA have come up with the idea, let's make it independent, ensure that the political will of the county or the city, excuse me, is not influencing how our council districts are drawn. And so it would put that process in an independent commission made up of 16 folks to ensure integrity and fairness throughout that process. Again, this is one, 0 support or opposition was submitted to the county for the voter information guide and does require a 50% vote to pass. And then the last measure here, Measure II, which has to do with some city administration operations. Again, it amends the city charter to do a number of different things. I think the one biggest thing I'll point out here, and again, this is the verbiage from the city, is clarify that the Board of Airport Commissioners' authority to establish fees, rules, and regulations regarding ground transportation at airports. I know this may have some impact to a few members of the Greater San Fernando Valley Chamber. It also makes a few other things here, of changing the title from Director of the Office of Administration and Research Services to City Administration Officer, and some other minuscule changes. Does require a majority vote to pass, and once again, no support or opposition submitted to the city for inclusion in the voter information guide. And that is all the measures we have scheduled to talk about today. Again, just one final little plug here. If you'd like to sign up for our updates, feel free to do so at CaliforniaBallotInitiativeUpdate.com. And otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can kick it off to the next section, Nancy.
Well, let me just bring up that Measure II really quick, because I know we have some people from the airport, airport tenants here, and I'm sure they saw the email that came out this morning. So, I brought this one up because whenever, Van Nuys Airport brings in what, $15 billion a year to the city of Los Angeles. And so it was a concern. So I reached out to the Van Nuys Airport. What is it? I'm on the VNA board. I don't know what it stands for. VNAA. And their attorney got back to us and they said that the one of the sections already provides that the BOAC may fix and collect rates and charges for the use of the airport assets and any other services provided by the airport. The amendment would add, including the establishments of fees for the use and access of airport property by commercial and private operators of aeronautical and ground transportation purposes. But it does not immediately strike me, this is the attorney saying, it doesn't immediately strike him as harmful, since the BOAC already has the power to charge fees for aeronautical operations. But given that, it's also unclear why the charter amendment is thought to be necessary, potentially to ensure that ground transportation is unquestionably included, because it defines airport assets, that it might be a basis to question if BOAC can charge fees for ground side usage. So I'm not sure if, like, we're not taking positions today, but I don't know if anyone, I know there's different people here like Don D and I see Catherine Perwin. If anyone wants to chime in on this, or when government affairs meets, and it might just be something we don't even take a position on. I just wanted to make sure that we kept it on our radar screen. So, Don D or Catherine, any views on that?
Yeah, so Nancy, this is Dondi. I think at one of the recent Board of Airport Commissioners meetings, it might have been a couple months ago, there was a provision or discussion on these types of fees for the rental car companies. So they were basically just extending the fees that were being charged at LAX to the same providers at Van Nuys. So I think if this is just more of a clarification of, I guess, of their obligations or their rights and their responsibilities, I think it kind of goes along with what's already happening at LAX to extend to Van Nuys, as if I remember right on that discussion.
Okay, so and I know we have a bunch of people from government affairs here. We could discuss it at government affairs if we want to take a position, or just remain neutral or not take a position at all. But like I said, I wanted to make sure that we covered our airport. Yeah.
Nancy, it's Catherine. I
Hey.
think we really need to maybe have a conversation with the VNA as a larger group before we discuss it further, because it does affect the FBOs at Van Nuys.
Right. Well, I got the email from the attorney.
Right.
And I'm saying, but what VNAA does, and that's great, just we might make sure that if they do something, it needs to come back to our government affairs committee before we take a position, or just not gonna take a position.
Of course, that's my suggestion, is that we do talk.
We're not taking any positions right now anyhow.
Got it.
This is just information, because we have a lot of members who always wonder how we take positions, and we get presentations, or we already so we've had pre-meetings at some of our government affairs on a lot of these issues, just so people know, and then kind of picked what ballot props we wanted to look at. We look at what other business organizations are doing across the state. We get feedback from them as well on their positions on it, because there are times, and I know Stuart was going to be on here from VICA. Both VICA and I, our chamber took a different position than everyone else on something because it affected the valley differently. And so, we really try to be cognizant of that. So, but it's just great to get everything in one place. And then the other measure for the city charter, I mean, I'm sure everyone remembers, especially if you came to our State of the Valley in 2022, when Nuri was on our panel, and 2 days later, the whole thing broke out with the racist comments and everything. So that was because they were trying to change the redistricting themselves, elected officials, and that's what this charter amendment came from, with a lot of encouragement from business groups and individuals. And so I felt it was important that we hear that one today as well. But if anyone has questions about specific ones, I know that United LA is here, and I know that they have a different view than the business organizations on Measure A. So if you want, Sonia, I know you're here if you want to say something about that.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think, for United LA, we're very much.
We can't hear you. We lost you. You totally cut out, Sonia.
How weird is that? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, apologies for that. Yeah, so I think we're looking at Measure A, more of an with.
You're cutting out again.
I'm so sorry. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I'm like at full bars. Hopefully this can work. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I'll make it quick. We're looking at this more as a long-term issue, looking at it as a preventative issue, and thinking about how we can really explore the opportunities that the city and the county are already working on to address that population between 18 to 24, which we're seeing is one of the ones that's growing most rapidly on homelessness issues. And thinking that Measure A can definitely commit to addressing the issue of prevention. And so while it is a hard ask, and we realize that the inflation and the high cost of living is an issue, we're really trying to look at this with a long-term lens of how we can avoid the problem growing tremendously as the way we have seen it. So that's a little bit about us. I'm sorry that I'm trying to make it fast, given that my connection is bad, but happy to answer any questions.
So just really quick for everyone. So the business groups are opposing it, or neutral. Okay. And mainly because Measure H, people feel, one, it wasn't used properly to fund it, and this would be a permanent tax, while Measure H had a sunset. So we would continue to be paying a tax on something that already didn't have enough transparency and accountability. And that's the big concern. On the business side, it has nothing to do with moving forward. I think everyone agrees we need to move homelessness forward, but it's all about how our tax dollars are being spent and how the county has not done a great job with their accountability on this one. But again, government affairs can review it, and everything, because I think there's great points all around on it, because obviously I think we want to move the needle on homelessness, but as a business organization, we're always going to look at sunsets and taxation too, Sonia, so.
I totally appreciate that. And I just really appreciate the dialogue, right, of learning from each other in today's call of the pros and cons. And I think at the end, we all have the ultimate end goal. The strategy of getting there, I think, is what's most difficult, and not just Measure A, but a bunch of other issues. And I believe I maybe have some colleagues on the call that could speak more on the governance issue, but I'm on my cell phone, so I shouldn't assume. But I'm sure others can respond to that point you flagged with a bit more information than I can.
We know that they're trying to add more accountability, and this is just so you guys know, almost every year, there's a parks bond from the county. And the reason why there's that parks bond is because they did a previous parks bond that had restricted funds, and then they didn't use the funds. So and they're not allowed to use those funds for anything else. So instead they come back with another parks bond, which is again another tax. And these all go on your property taxes. And so we have been, as an organization, very leery of things that don't have sunsets and don't have and who have already had struggling with accountability, no matter what guardrails are put in there, because there hasn't been proof. And I'm just saying that that's how we've looked at it, so, and that's not just on this is on anything that has to do with license, tax, or fee that hasn't been managed well in the past. And the county, unfortunately, does not have a good track record, for that. But again, we're open to dialogue on it. And this is really just an information meeting, so our members can make their own decisions. Don't forget also, by the way, if you're not registered to vote, today is National Register to Vote Day. So you can still do that. So I don't know, does anyone else want to chime in on anything? Because if not, I know Ben can close it out. And what I'd like to say is, we do have some government affairs committee members here on our board, and we could just kind of discuss our next steps, because we want to make sure that we get, I'm going to, ask everyone else to step off, and we could just kind of just figure out what our next steps are going to be. So we could take our positions on an educated level and get that out to our members. Okay, well, then if there aren't any other questions, I really want to thank Ben. I really appreciate every time Swing Strategies comes in and gives us these presentations, because they're not just us talking about the ballots, it's the whole kit and caboodle, which I have no knowledge of. And
I don't think you give yourself enough credit on that front, Nancy, but we love coming in and giving these presentations, and thank the chamber for having us, and more than happy to come back in 2026.